Good evening, everybody. Many blessings on this very, very special day of Master's Mahasamadhi and also of Mahashivratri. It's a beautiful dual blessing, you might say. On this day, many, many years ago, 64 years ago, Yogananda ji left his body. And Swamiji said that, once somebody asked him this question, he said, "Sir, so many people come on this planet, great souls." He says, Krishna came, Buddha, Jesus, their teachings are still enduring. Why is this world the way it is right now? So much turbulence, confusion, divisions. And Swami says, you see, that's the nature of the world. He then said, that is precisely why these great souls come. Not necessarily to perfect the world. In higher ages, Master gave us a beautiful teaching through his Guru, Sri Yukteswar. He said, in higher ages, there are things like higher ages. He said, we are right now at an age called Dwapar age, before which comes the dark age, Kali Yuga. People are often fighting. We will see if you go on some trek, each village would have some fort, or in Europe there are these forted cities, gated cities. And Master says, then we go into Dwapar age for 2400 years, Treta 3600, Satya Yuga for 4800 years, and then we descend. We ascend and we descend in these cycles. And the significance in our own lives of these cycles, these time periods, is that our consciousness of the planet, especially of the individuals, society, comes up and goes down. And as it mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, that as and when vice, greed, intolerance, ascends, from God's side descends an avatar who brings light, who brings hope, who brings blessings to all that are willing to receive. Yogananda ji said Jesus was such an avatar. That's why it is said that as many as received him gave he the blessings to become the sons of God. Master says that's the only definition allowed to everybody. We live in a world today where, things are defined. I mean, actually, that's taken to be a mark of, intelligence, that how precisely can you define things, explain them, categorize them, and thereby gain some understanding, which is helpful. It is extremely helpful. Otherwise, how would I tell somebody what kind of doctor am I? And which school do I go to? What's my name? Where do I come from? And so many things. But Master says that does not define you. In my opinion, I think that's his highest contribution. That's his greatest teaching. That through his autobiography, through his life, through his teachings, his example, the example of his disciples, he proved, not only mentioned, he proved that he was beyond the body, and thereby we too must be having the same potential. Once he was carrying a small wishing well in the gardens of his ashram in Mount Washington and wanted the monks to place it in a certain way. A wishing well is a small well, and in which you drop a coin, make a prayer. How in India we throw a coin sometimes in a pond or river and such. And Master, as he was guiding this movement, the heavy, it was 300 pounds or more heavy well, slipped from their hands and it fell on his feet. And he winced in pain. But then, and they were all aghast and tried to pick it up. He said, wait. He says, now is the perfect example, opportunity to show you how we can raise our consciousness beyond the body. And he said, the monks later told Swamiji that he lifted his consciousness. And there was this beatific smile on his face. All, like pain had vanished. And then he says, now I'll bring my consciousness back in the body. And they said his body started trembling and his face was red and he was sweating. And then he said, now again I'll lift my consciousness. At such degree. Then he would give the example of Mahatma Gandhi, who was operated here in Pune many years ago. And Master says, by mind control practice of yoga, Gandhiji had attained such power of mind that he could put it where he wanted or withdraw it from any activity that was happening. And this activity which Master was reporting was an appendix surgery on Gandhiji himself. And Gandhiji, at some point there was a storm. He asked the surgeon in Sassoon Hospital, why aren't we starting? And he said, sir, the anesthetist has not arrived. And Gandhiji said, come to think of it, I'm not asking for anesthesia because I have a very important meeting tomorrow. Why don't we get done with this? And Master said, during the surgery, he was discussing the points for the meeting next day with his secretary, Mahadev Desai, and they opened his stomach. I don't know how many of you I've done an appendix surgery, so I know you basically go right in the stomach and you pull out a part of the intestine, which is appendix, and then you close the stomach. That, Master said again, he hinted that is the potential, he says, of the human mind. And here we live in a society where that is not taught. Swami says the greatest problem with education in schools today is that it is atheistic. Whether they claim it or not, but principles are most principles are by no extension shining examples of saintliness. I remember once, a psychiatrist, a friend of mine, really wanted to examine me after I joined the path, and he says, please give me 15 minutes with you. I said, okay. His first question was, what do you do? I said, I meditate. He said, why do you meditate? I said, have you read this? I said, there's a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. And I started to tell him my story. He said, I know about that book. My brother-in-law has read that. He says, so I said, well, there you go. You must know why I meditate. I said, I want to become a saint. I want to become saintly. That's the goal of mankind. He said, but you're a doctor. He says, don't you think all doctors are saints? My eyes popped out. I said, maybe they are saintly. Some of them I said, you can't say. I said, a saint. I said, you read an autobiography. What is a saint? That is the potential. That Master says is the goal. That's the only adventure. And I thank him again and again, and Swami Kriyananda too, for never compromising on that. Because you wake up in the morning, you don't feel like a saint. But when we are in satsang, Yogananda ji said, band together, be in small groups, support one another. In the beginning when I came on the path, I was so charged up. I thought, well, I could do without support. I could just live by myself anywhere. As the years rolled by, while in the monastery, I realized what it means to have daily support. Presence. No words exchanged, no theory. Presence of one another. Seeing living examples of one another. That is satsang. Yogananda ji said that is very important. He says that's the most important thing once you have found a guru, to have like-minded company. Swamiji said many people think because Yogananda ji's stature was so great. Now, I was totally won over because before knowing him and about his life, I used to follow Gandhi ji's principles very much. I said that was a high order and I said I'll try my best to see what works, which worked in his life. When I read about Yogananda ji, I saw that he was the perfect person who, you might say, he is a bridge, I think, for the whole world, that he was as human as anybody could be, but absolutely divine too. And Swamiji said that once Kriyananda ji was a young monk and he was wondering after he had read autobiography when he would see Yogananda ji, talk about general things. Once he was giving somebody an instruction because the person was leaving for another place to give a lecture and Master was giving general instructions. He could be like that. Once when Swamiji was editing the Bhagavad Gita lessons for him and also the Rubaiyat, Master wrote him a letter and there he added in the footnotes after the main instruction was over, he says, I hope you're drinking milk twice a day. And after every couple of hours of editing, take a 5-minute jog around your room. Ask the staff for stationery and pencil sharpeners. Such details. But at the same time, then Swami said, his stature, his spirituality was so high that Master, his blessings, his bliss could be felt by everybody who was around him. But then Swami said, how do we approach such a person? Now, of course, none of us have met him. Maybe it's more pertinent for us to ask that question. How do we approach his consciousness? Swami says that this is what Master preferred. Once, while he was giving those instructions to a minister, Swami had this thought that Master is knowing what's going to happen with the event. He's everywhere. He also understands that I'm having these questions about his, expanded consciousness. How must I relate to him? And Master gently looked at him, walked a few steps, and handed him an apple which he was holding in his hand. He just looked at him, and then gently, smilingly left. And Swami said that, by the way, everything that happened around in between Swami and Master, Swami said he meditated for it for years. And he says when he meditated on this story, it was very clear that Master was telling him, approach my infinity, approach God consciousness, not in spite of my humanity, but through it. Don't ignore this form, don't ignore the needs. Master would often make joke of people who come on the yoga path, and they would say, I'm not this body. This world is a dream. Master says, what happens when you bump your head in a dream? He says, in the dream world, your dream head hurts. He says, that's our situation. We are in a dream, yes. He says, it's very good. It's a starting point. He says, but why do you want to live in a bad dream? Then he gave all his teachings. He says, how to be healthy, how to become a magnetic person. As a doctor, I studied for 8 years those big fat books. There was not a single chapter on magnetizing yourself or magnetizing your brain. And that is where medicine is. But I'm trying to make you understand the high teachings that maybe have come into our lives way before the world itself will receive them. Who knows? But Master says, I recently rebought this book, Gray's Anatomy, to study how far latest embryology has reached. Because after Master mentioned that once the sperm and ova unite at the moment of conception in the mother's womb, he says it forms the medulla oblongata. So, as things get better, I was studying, they are not close to that. They can only see things beyond a certain point, beyond a certain date. But Master was very clear. He says, you must magnetize your spine. You must magnetize your brain. You can, he said, use your body, use your mind to achieve anything that you want. Then he says, what is success? We all are looking for success. A student is looking for it. A businessman is looking for it. As a family person, maybe a couple is looking for it. They are seeking perfect harmony. A devotee is absolutely looking for, spiritual success in this life. And Master says for success to understand that, he says, first you must understand what is happiness. You should differentiate between that which is transient, which we all have quite a bit of experience of, to that which is more lasting and more lasting, till ultimately it is everlasting. And again, he proved it by his own example. He also said, most people come on the path when they're not happy or restless. He says, then they learn a technique of meditation and they attain deep peace, divine peace for that moment. He says, but life is still turbulent. He says, but you give yourself a few months of practice and you start noticing that things that were throwing you off earlier, you're still being able to hold your peace there. Then Master added, give yourself a few more years. He says, you'll be peaceful half the time, but the world will still get you the other half. Then he said, if you continue joyfully, with intelligence, practicing, he says, at the end of your life, after years of practice, you will always be happy. Now, isn't that, as a doctor, I was totally so happy to hear that that is how life is designed, can be lived, is the potential. And Swami says that he saw that in Master, and that is what is a gift to us. I want to share one or two sides of Master's life in the next few minutes. Ananda said that he had a great sense of humor. He says often, people think that, Swami himself thought that, my goodness, such a profound saint. As a little boy, Yogananda said he would go to these saints and they would address him as sir. He would ask them questions, but by the end of their meeting, discussion, he said they would be asking me other questions. That he did not write an autobiography of a yogi, but he told this to other people so that people could understand his stature in time. I think a great soul like him has to be given time. Some of the things that he attempted in his time, Swami says, the school, the community, he started probably America's first veg restaurant. In time, they all failed. Does that mean they are not meant to happen? No. Maybe the time had not come and he was starting it. But all that, Swami says, he still preserved a great sense of humor. One time, he loved telling this joke. He said, your teeth are like stars. They come out at night. Swami said he loved telling another joke about these three men, one Englishman, the other a Scotsman, and the Irish person who went to a bar to have whiskey. And he said they all got their glass of whiskey, but at the same time, a fly fell into all those glasses. And they were kind of disappointed and like, what to do? Well, the Englishman simply, Master says, picked up his glass and sloshed some of the whiskey and the fly went out. But he lost some whiskey, you see, in the process. The Scotsman was wiser. He gently picked up the fly, a little bit shook it, threw the fly and kind of, went back to drinking his whiskey. But the Master was most interested in the Scotsman, in the Irishman. And Master says the Irishman, he carefully picked up the fly and he squeezed the fly and then threw the fly and went back to drinking. And Swami says the way he would emphasize on squeezed the fly, if you know, the joke is that Irishmen are very miserly, that they do not want to waste any drop of their whiskey. And Master loved telling it. Swami said, I don't know if Master heard this joke, but in the West, there's a culture that after the church gathering, a small hat is passed around and people contribute in that. And so one time, 3 Irishmen went to attend you might call it a Sunday morning satsang And after the discourse, a hat was passed around, and just seeing the hat, one of the men fainted. And his other 2 friends picked him up and took him out of the church. That's such kind, Another time Swamiji said that, now Swamiji was, as I mentioned, a bit too intellectual, in his approach. We also have to give him some license. He was, after all, 22 years old when he came to Yogananda ji. And, he said, I was absolutely in awe of Master. When I was in his presence, I was just like, I didn't know what to do really so much. I remember once I was in a meeting with Swamiji and some young teenagers who had come from a school. And one of them said, Swami says, do you have any questions? And one of them said, sir, I'm just too nervous to ask questions. And Swami says, there's nothing to be nervous about. I'm just your friend. And then he asked him this question. He said, sir, how were you when Yogananda ji was around you? And Swami said, nervous. That was so sweet of him. But what was I sharing? So one time, Yogananda ji was doing his Bhagavad Gita, the revelations of Christ, the Bible interpretations, and the Rubaiya, the very, very heavy work. And he had taken a long seclusion in a desert retreat and went there with some monks, and nobody was disturbing him. And one evening, Master sent somebody and he said, please call Walter. That was the name Swamiji was called by. And he said, please call Walter to the room. And Swamiji stepped in the room and he saw Master was sitting. And Master says, please give me my bag. And they handed him a small paper bag. And he said, turn off the lights. Swamiji was wondering what's happening. And then Master took out a gun. He started shooting in the air. It was a toy gun and it was throwing sparks after. And Swami was wondering what's happening, and then Master turned over there towards him and he said, what do you think of that, Walter? And Swami said, sir, it's fine, it's perfectly fine, it's great. And then Master says, watch this one. And he shot another gun, and a small toy soldier came out and landed through his parachute. And then again, before Swami was wondering what's happening, he knew that Master was trying to teach him a lesson. Then Master looked at him and he said, suffer little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. That you cannot intellectually grasp who is God. Why did He create us? How did He create this universe? So many people have that question. After they have finally reached the point to accept somewhere that God must be a possibility, the next question is, how did He do all this? Master was saying, be like a child. Be childlike. Does a child ask his parents, I remember when I was a child and my dad was in the army, he was getting transferred. The first time I remember moving by train, I was so much in awe of my father that here was somebody who was coming and giving us a ticket in the seat, in the train, and nobody was asking us why we are. I said, my dad knows everybody. We are in the train and we are being given food and we are traveling all over this place. That we don't understand how it works, and it doesn't matter. You're receiving the love, you're being taken care of. In time, like I understand now, we all will come to understand love is the most important thing. And those were the teachings that Master brought. Somebody once asked him, how can I love God when I have no idea or concept or experience of Him? Master says, do Kriya Yoga. He says, as you do Kriya Yoga for a few weeks and months, he says, its divine quality which comes is joy. He says you'll start feeling joy. When you compare that experience of meditation to anything that you've compared so far, he says you will understand why God is called Ananda. Ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy. So as great as his mission is of communities, of education, Master ultimately he made a prediction that the world will see wonderful days of unity among armies, police. He said ultimately in not so distant future, the currency of the world will be one. He said not so much disparity also. So such beautiful things, and I have not so far seen anything that Master said not come true. So I'm optimistic that these things will come true. But then you ask the question, how? We are so few people. How will this ever happen? And Master said, starts with you. He says, above all, change your consciousness. Pray to God. Ask Him. Don't look into the future, neither live in the past. Live in the moment. Do what needs to be done today. And what does He expect from us every day? I think daily meditation. Daily reflection. He was so compassionate and considerate. He would say, after dinner, sit for 10 minutes by yourself, undisturbed. Ask yourself, how was my day? Did I fare well? Could I have done better? What can I do better tomorrow? Is there anything I need to change in my life? I think that is the most clear way I've ever seen to reflect. It's not boring, it's not painful, it's not self-judging, it is simply seeing things as they are. And then he said, ask God to help you. Kriyananda ji, and this is very relevant in our times, people are losing faith in God. Swamiji said, there's just too much talk about God testing me, God is testing me, God is testing me. Swami said, Master would say, why don't you test God for a moment? One sincere prayer in the night. Master says, in your own words, one sincere prayer. Help me understand things. The other day somebody came up to me, he said that in a satsang, he was praying to Swamiji. He had never met Swamiji, but he prayed to Swamiji that Swamiji, I have not met you, but please bless me through the Acharya. Somebody was giving a satsang. Please bless me through this Acharya. And he said, I prayed and prayed all my 20 minutes of meditation. And this is a level 2 student, so we don't do level 2. In level 2, nobody does a blessing ceremony. But that teacher, at the end of the class, had the inspiration. He said, let's do a blessing ceremony. Because Master's Mahasamadhi is coming. And later that teacher said that she had this thought that these people are coming on Sundays, they will not come on Monday. This happened yesterday. So maybe I should do a blessing ceremony. And the man was shaking as he came up to our Acharya and he said, Swamiji has blessed me today through you. So this is how the Spirit works. This is the sweetness. One sincere prayer. I think as devotees in times which are confusing, where people are gaining faith, but also on the verge of sometimes losing it. Today a friend of mine lost his elder brother, young brother, in an accident. How shaken he must be. Can we console them? Can we share joy? Can we bring understanding? Yes, above all in ourselves. And never feel shy to share it. Swami says this particular life of Yogananda ji, not speaking of the much distant past, was intensely busy in sharing. How was Swami's life? Intensely busy in sharing. What is sharing? Acting as a channel. We don't share anything of our own. When we open and remove ourselves, the Guru gets an opportunity after his physical passing, like this friend received a blessing, to come and be blessed. So I'm so delighted for this satsang in Pune city. Very much happy to have your friendship over these years. And let's strengthen our resolve for daily meditation. By the way, I'm so happy Pradnya has started this morning. She drove from her house near the highway to come at 6:45 for morning meditation. Lazy has agreed to stay overnight because she stays very far to do the Friday morning meditation. And Gaurav and I have started doing some meditations. Snehalji is doing. Every morning we are having meditations over here. Let's get together. Let's daily start our day by experiencing the soul. Once we have that, Master says it does not matter what you do, because whatever you touch and do will have the bliss and the guidance of God.